Hey everyone, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat the GMAT, and welcome to today's Write Like an Expert session. Today we're going to be analyzing the essay questions for this year's Harvard Business School application for the 2012-2013 season. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Write Like an Expert series, this is an annual series that we put on for the Beat the GMAT community where we invite top MBA admissions experts to walk us through each essay question for the top MBA programs. Joining us today for this Harvard analysis is ClearAdmit, as well as the co-founder of ClearAdmit, Graham Richmond. So a couple words about both this company as well as Graham. ClearAdmit is one of the legendary companies in the MBA admissions consulting space. They're known for being highly effective in getting their clients into their dream business schools. The company uses a personalized methodology that combines the perspectives of MBA admissions officers, expert editors, MBA students, and MBA applicants to maximize your chances for getting accepted to a top MBA program. Graham is, as I mentioned, the co-founder of ClearAdmit. He has over 10 years of experience in the MBA admissions consulting space and the MBA admissions space at large. Before co-founding ClearAdmit, Graham served as a leader at a startup and also had several years as an admissions officer at Wharton. So talk about being an insider. He went to Swarthmore for his undergraduate program and Wharton for his MBA. So just from his personal history, he knows something about getting into top higher education programs. So before I hand it off to Graham, I just want to say a few words about the structure for today's event. So Graham is going to go through a presentation in the next few moments where he will analyze and share his perspective for this year's 2012-2013 Harvard Business School MBA application essays. After his presentation, though, be sure to stick around because he will be also sticking around to do a live Q&A with our audience. So if you have questions about HBS's essays this year, you can enter those questions into the MBA Watch comment wall on the HBS MBA Watch page. And this is going to be a moderated chat, so our team is going to be seeing the questions coming in. We're going to publish them one by one for Graham to answer, and we'll go through as many questions as we can during the hour. So that being said, Graham, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Eric, for the introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here once again this year for the Write Like an Expert series. I think it's a great service that Beat the GMAT provides to the applicant pool, and again, just a pleasure to be here. Today we're going to kick off the series, and we're going to talk about Harvard Business School's essay topics for this year. First, I wanted to give you just a very brief background on ClearAdmit and my own personal background. So obviously, ClearAdmit is an admissions consulting company. We guide candidates through the process of applying to top schools and have been doing so for more than 10 years now. We work with applicants from across the globe and ensure that they maximize their success when applying. I personally co-founded ClearAdmit. I work as an admissions counselor within the company. And you know, before starting ClearAdmit, I worked as an admissions officer at Wharton, also completed my MBA from Wharton, and have over 10 years now in this space, actually closer to 15 at this point. And so again, just a pleasure to be here. That's kind of enough about me. I know that everyone's anxious to learn more about Harvard and what to expect this year. So let's sort of dive right in. I think that the first thing that people have been noticing about Harvard's application for this season is, I guess, what I would call the incredible shrinking application, right? So last year, for those of you keeping score at home, the school offered 4 required essays and a total of 2,000 words at your disposal to kind of share your background. This year, they've cut things back rather substantially, and they're not the only school doing this, so I'm sure you've taken note of the fact that several schools have kind of trimmed down the essay portion of the application. And so this year you have sort of 2 essays and 800 words. Now there are some other parts of the application, other essays and things that we'll get into later, but they're really at the outset, it's sort of 2 basic essays for most applicants. So what should you do with this information? I know a lot of candidates who were trying to be ultra prepared, got started on last year's essay topics only to then have the rug pulled out from under them a bit and find that there's a very different assignment this year. So some candidates are probably in panic mode. They're maybe a little bit worried about, what does this mean? I don't have many words to kind of express myself. But I don't actually think that's the right approach here. And I know others are saying, oh, this is, we live in an era of social media and status updates and tweets. And so Harvard is effectively slimming things down to be more in line with that or something. And that there are all kinds of theories. But at the end of the day, Harvard's made the application shorter because they want to remove barriers to application. I mean, they want to attract the absolute best and brightest candidates on the planet. And they felt like the essays were a little burdensome, and so they're just scaling back. And I don't think people need to be afraid of that. Obviously, whenever you're putting together an application, you want to take the requisite time to pick the right stories to tell and such. But again, I don't think panic is in order here. Another thing I would say is, listen to Dee Leopold, who's the director of admissions at Harvard. She does weekly webinars. She has a really great blog, and she's very transparent. Harvard is one of the most transparent admissions committees, and so listen to what they say. They tend to be straight shooters, and so attend her webinars, read her blog, and just make sure you're up to speed on what they're telling you about their application and what they want. The other thing I would say is look beneath the surface here. So while there are only these sort of two main essays, it turns out, as you'll see momentarily, that there are some other assignments as part of the application that are kind of new for this year, and that I think will give candidates a lot of room to stretch out and share their candidacy. So let's kind of move right into it now. These are the kind of materials that you have to submit on the essay end of things for Harvard this year. So they're the two required essays. There's one, what I would call short answer, which is 500 characters. There is a post-interview reflection this year, and that's new. And there's no word limit on it. It's essentially an email that you're going to send to the committee, and we will talk about that a bit later in this presentation. So the first essay, tell us about something you did well. Essay number 2 is tell us about something you wish you had done better. So there's some nice symmetry there. And then they have a short answer about sort of how an MBA supports your career plan, which is very kind of common ground, or kind of often requested piece of information that schools ask for. And then the last piece is this interview, kind of post-interview essay, or technically it's not an essay, it's just an email that you're going to send them. And again, we'll talk about each of these in detail. One thing I wanted to point out was that the first 2 questions are not that radically different from past years. So many of you may already know that Harvard has traditionally asked for 3 accomplishments or 3 things that you've done well, and 3 setbacks or things that didn't go as well as you'd hope. So this is still within that general theme. Again, they're just kind of scaling back a bit. So let's go essay by essay, if you will. The first essay, tell us about something you did well, is a 400-word essay. That's actually a great word count for an essay. I mean, you should have ample room to describe the something that you did well, and really give them the detail that's needed. In fact, if you look at this versus last year or prior years, the school used to have 3 accomplishments or 3 things that you did well and only 600 words. So you're actually getting a bit more room to kind of really elaborate on a single event here. One thing I would say is that, this is the first essay, and so it is an opportunity to kind of introduce or establish the major themes of your candidacy. So when you think about your background and what you want the admissions reader to kind of walk away from your file with, this is obviously an important essay to kind of pick the right story for. It also, I think needs to be a story with a demonstrably positive outcome. So remember, HBS, like most of the top MBA programs, is very impact-oriented. They've been known to say things like, well, what we really look for is, what has this person done with their time on the planet, or what impact have they had on their employer, community, country, etc. Right? So think about the impact that you might be able to showcase in this essay. The other thing that's kind of probably obvious but worth mentioning here is that this essay should be a nice chance for you to showcase sort of personal growth or new skills, lessons learned. That's a really valuable piece here that you can highlight. I feel that any area of your background is fair game. Although, again, there are two essays, two main essays this year, and so it might be a bit odd to pick sort of obscure, extracurricular activities from college, for example, for both of the essays. So you want to keep sort of employment history, current extracurricular activities, community service. Those are probably the first place that you might mine for stories that fit this essay prompt. Another thing I would say is, consider the balance here with the second essay, and we'll get into that in a moment. But, whenever you're selecting a topic here, you can't do so in a vacuum. You have to think about what are the other essay questions the school is asking, and how do I fit these pieces together. So again, I think this is a great chance for you to sort of open your application with a strong, very rich anecdote about something that you've done well. Ideally, it highlights the impact you've had, some lessons that you've learned, and again, you can think about your work experience, extracurriculars, community service, anything in your background that you think will provide you with a really rich anecdote here. So let's move on to the second essay. The second essay question is, tell us something you wish you had done better. And again, 400 words, very similar to the first essay. Here you have, you've got to pick something that didn't go as well as you'd hoped, or that, you sort of could have done better. And one thing I will say is this, this is not the place to sort of say, well, I had a 3.9 and I could have had a 4.0 GPA, and I really wish that I had done better and gotten a perfect GPA. That's what we would call a veiled strength. And I think that the HBS admissions board is looking for evidence of your maturity, your ability to kind of admit faults or things that haven't gone right, and a time when you didn't do something as well as you could have. And so I would not use this essay as a chance to present what we would call a veiled strength. Okay, I think of this essay as an opportunity to showcase your resilience, your resourcefulness, an ability to learn from a negative experience. Again, broad range of possible topics here: professional, academic, extracurricular, personal. I think, looking over the course of your career and academic history and personal background, failures or mistakes are likely a good place to start. I will also say that, it may be harder to talk about something that happened last week, because I do feel that a vital component of this essay is going to be showcasing, something that you wish you'd done better, but the learning process that came out of that. And ideally, there's been a window of time where perhaps you've been able to apply that learning process. And so if you just lost $10 million for your company last week, probably not a great story to tell, because even though you may have learned something, you probably haven't yet had a chance to put that something into action, right? So definitely think about things that perhaps did not happen super recently. Again, qualities that you want to demonstrate here: maturity, insight, reflection. They really are looking to see whether or not you're able to kind of self-assess and recognize a time when you underperformed. Focus on the steps that you took to overcome the instance that you describe in this essay, and again, discuss the resulting growth and or lessons learned. You have 400 words, which is more than you would have had last year for any individual setback that you would have been discussing. So again, plenty of room to stretch out, tell the story, and offer some reflection and kind of lessons learned. Again, as I mentioned earlier, consider the balance here with essay number one, in terms of, if you're someone who has had a couple of different jobs or some very substantial community service or outside activities and interests, or a very substantial role as an undergraduate, this would be a place to make sure that you're kind of balancing and not sort of picking two stories that are coming from the exact same employment experience here. Okay, so keep that in mind. You don't want to kind of miss an opportunity to showcase another side of your background with these essays. So another piece of the application this year is this short answer, I guess we'll call it. And essentially what HBS does is they ask you to select an industry and a job function in terms of your post-MBA target. So, you might be saying, oh, I want to work as an analyst for, an investment bank, or, whatever the job may be. Ideally an associate, I guess, if you're going to banking. But in any event, you're going to pick an industry and a job function from a list, a very long kind of pick list of choices. And then right after that, they say, how does pursuing an MBA support your choices above? And you have 500 characters. That's not a typo. It's characters, not words. Many applicants have already been coming to Clear Admit assuming that that was words and not characters. So 500 characters is only about 60 to 70 words, and that means you're going to have to give them a very concise, direct response. Anything other than that is probably going to fall flat, and you're just, so you need to be kind of weighing every word that you use here. On some levels, this is a classic sort of why MBA question. A lot of programs ask about this. They are curious to know where you're hoping to go next, and then kind of how their program might help you. So give that some thought. And remember, you're applying to an academic institution, and so it'd be best to think about, well, what courses and activities at HBS am I going to participate in over the course of my MBA that will help me reach my career goals? What is the job that I want post-MBA? What skills might I need for that job? And how will HBS and their MBA program deliver those skills? Or how will I learn from my classmates? Maybe it's because of the case method. There's so many ways to go with this. And I think that space permitting, it's fair game to assume that in this question, an MBA sort of means an HBS MBA. Obviously, you could answer the question just by talking about how the MBA generally supports your choices, but I think that if you can do it in a concise fashion, you might point to elements of the HBS MBA in particular that are ideally suited to or reaching those goals. So again, you're applying to an academic institution. This is not the place to sort of say, oh, it's really, I want the HBS name on my resume. That's going to help me reach my goals. I presume none of you would do that, but I just want to mention it just to be sure. So this is, again, a tricky question only because of the length. Otherwise, it should be very kind of straight down the middle of the plate kind of stuff for most of you, since you will be writing essays about this very subject matter for other programs that you consider. So that's the short answer. And now we move to the new component of their application, which is a post-interview reflection. And the question that they ask is, you've just finished your HBS interview, tell us about it. How well did we get to know you? Now, the first thing I should mention is that, for better or for worse, this exercise will only be given to those of you who actually get an interview. And if you don't already know, Harvard tends to interview somewhere in the 20 to 25% range of the applicant pool. So it's a small group that are going to get this exercise. Obviously, if you get an interview at HBS, it's a really great sign, and so you should be excited about that, and then be excited to sort of tackle this final exercise in the application process. Now, there are some interesting elements here with the reflection. The first is that there's no word limit. The second is that you have a 24-hour deadline to submit it following the interview. And so, what that means is that, by nature, sure, there's no word limit, but if you only have 24 hours, you're not going to be able to submit a novel, and I wouldn't recommend it either. Remember, your admissions reader on the board there is a busy person, and, part of the exercise here is your ability to kind of summarize the interview experience and talk about how well they got to know you, but to do so at a kind of executive summary level. Imagine that you have just come back from a business trip where you made a pitch to a client and have promised them a kind of proposal, when your flight lands or something. This is that type of exercise. And I think in some levels, it really does mirror the real world. And so for all the griping that we've heard and nervousness that we've heard from candidates about, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this in 24 hours? And the truth is that this is pretty real life, and that's why they're doing it in many respects. I think another reason they're doing it is because it does allow you to kind of have the last word, or to make a kind of closing argument, to use a legal analogy. And I think that they're serious about the group of candidates that they interview. Again, they make a very steep cut when it comes to deciding who to interview. And I think their point of view is that if you made it that far, let's give you a chance to kind of have the final word, and just let us know how the interview went and how well we got to know you. One thing I wanted to mention is that Dee Leopold, who's the director at HBS, again, she claims that grammar and polish are not an issue. That this is not meant to be something that you pre-write and prepare months in advance and then, have it proofread by 10 of your friends or an admissions consultant or something. In her mind, it's really meant to be something that you write after the interview and send in, and that you don't worry too much about grammar or polish. I will add one caveat to that, and I feel that while I hear her loud and clear on it, I think that if you were to submit a statement that was just riddled with typos and spelling mistakes, or poorly worded English, that may not reflect as well on you as something that's well written could. And so what I would say is that you should certainly reread this before you send it in. I don't recommend that you write it in advance, if only because it is going to be based around the interview, and you won't really be able to speak to that event until you've actually interviewed, right? So, but what I would say is don't go nuts about proofing 100 times or something, but certainly take the time, as you would with any email correspondence, to give it a look over. Again, the analogy to a pitch that you're making to a client is probably apt here. You would probably proofread an email that you might send to a client after meeting with them. So a few other things to sort of discuss here. I think this is a great platform for a candidate to summarize the key thrust of their candidacy, and to kind of shape the admissions board's view on that applicant. Obviously you'll get a chance to kind of explain how the interview went, what was discussed, as well as maybe highlight some things that you wanted to share that you didn't have time for. So again, this is a really good exercise. I think it's very smart on the part of the HBS admissions team to focus on this group of candidates that they've already kind of determined are highly qualified and that they're interested in. And so to give them a little more airtime than the broader applicant pool makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that you do get to give your side of the story here. You might even be able to address a subpar interview. As far as some tips on like how to approach this, I would say the moment you leave your HBS interview and get yourself off campus or to a quiet space, you should really jot down notes. What questions were you asked? What topics were discussed? And then think about the interview and how it went vis-a-vis the general message you've been trying to convey to Harvard Business School over the course of the application process. Okay, so take inventory of what was discussed and compare it with your goals at the outset in terms of what it was that you wanted to showcase to the Harvard Admissions Board. So definitely taking some notes right away is important because it'll be fresh in your mind. I don't recommend that you then proceed to jot the whole to just jot down the email and send it off while you're on campus. I think that it'd be good to note the questions that were asked, really reflect on how it went, and then perhaps with a little bit of time gone by, a couple hours or so, you can sit down and begin writing. And honestly, I think it might make sense to sleep on it after you've written it and send it in the next day, while honoring their 24-hour turnaround policy here. So again, this is a really unique exercise. It's new. We are seeing a lot of new admissions, sort of pieces of the admissions process this year. We might see group interviews from Wharton this year, and Harvard has this post-interview essay. So a lot of interesting things happening, and I think this is a great exercise, and one that, again, mirrors the real world and should give you a chance to have the final word, which is terrific. I can't tell you how many clients we've worked with over the years who, come back after their HBS interview and say, well, boy, I wish I could have said A, B, and C to the committee, but now it's done, and I just have to sit back and wait for their decision. And so this gives you that's kind of extra chance to make the closing argument. So those are the main pieces of the Harvard application this year. I did want to draw your attention to some of the resources that ClearAdmit has at our disposal and at your disposal to help you in this process. Obviously, we do one-on-one consulting. You can send us your resume and sign up for a free chat with one of our admissions counselors. We also publish a whole range of ebooks that are incredibly popular with the applicant pool and have been just growing year after year. We do school guides, interview guides. There's a whole range of publications there, and you can visit our site and learn more about them. They download immediately, and they're great tools to kind of get beneath the surface and learn about the programs. Our website is another resource. We have tens of thousands of visitors a month reading articles that we publish. We do an admissions director Q&A series. We have so many things that can help you in this process. We analyze essays, and so definitely check out the website. And then finally, we partnered with Beat the GMAT and did a video course called Navigating the MBA Admissions Process, which is a kind of sort of do-it-yourself kit. You sign up for the course and you can watch the videos on your own time when you want and learn about the MBA admissions process and become a better applicant. So definitely take advantage of all these resources, reach out to us, we're here to help. And again, I wanted to thank Eric and the Beat the GMAT team for organizing this, and I wish you the best of luck on the HBS application. I'm now going to be available to take questions about HBS right on the MBA Watch comment wall. So definitely ping me your questions. I'm sure several of you have already been sending them in here, so I look forward to answering those now. Thanks again.
Thank you, Graham. What a great presentation on this year's Harvard Business School essay questions. So at this point, as I mentioned at the beginning of our introduction, Graham Richmond, who is the co-founder of ClearMit and an MBA admissions expert, is going to stick around for the remaining hour to answer your questions live about this year's 2012-2013 HBS essays. So at this point, if you have a question, feel free to post it on the MBA Watch page for Harvard Business School. It's going to be a moderated chat, so our team is going to be able to see the questions coming in, and we're going to have Graham answer as many of these questions as we can for the remaining hour. So thank you guys so much for sticking around for this presentation, and we're looking forward to the Q&A starting right now. Talk to you soon.